Oh, yeah. So the third and fourth text then from Monique Wittig and Cheshire Calhoun, who are basically doing the same sort of thing, but from the angle of heterosexism. So Wittig's piece dates from, I think, 1981, nearly 40 years ago. Certainly certain things have progressed since then, so people may not put forward the same kind of analysis today. Nonetheless, it's very interesting to have a look at. As she points out, this is, in her mind, a kind of materialist analysis, meaning she wants to go about things, approach the questions very concretely, as opposed to doing so through sort of existing ideas and concepts and so on. Basically, she would say those things are all kind of a matter of ideology that really just reflects sexist oppression anyways. That from her perspective, that's really what comes first, oppression. And that sets into and kind of, in a sense, creates the terms in which we understand that reality, such that there's no real way of seeing beyond it. So the very ideas or concepts or categories of woman and man, for example, all the categories and so on of sex and gender, all reflect sexist oppression, so that we can't really get a critical take on it using those concepts very much. That's what she thinks fundamentally we need to recognize. So the problem from her perspective isn't so much that women are oppressed, right, but more deeply that the very category of women just is a category of oppression. And so to the extent that we continue to think in those terms, we kind of fall for a myth, or we fall into a kind of trap where we imagine, wrongly in her view, that somehow women predate, so to speak, oppression, such that it would make sense at least to try to liberate women from their oppression. Whereas she thinks that's kind of a hopeless thing to imagine, because the very idea how we understand what a woman is itself kind of compromised by all that oppression. So it's a fairly kind of radical point or analysis, quite sweeping in its implications. The upshot is that, well, we really just need to think in completely different terms. We really just need to leave all that behind. There's no way to fix it, basically. We cannot fix relations between women and men. What we need to do, rather, is somehow kind of bring about quite a remarkable transformation where individual human beings are no longer slotted into these categories, so that we don't have those oppressive, unequal relationships anymore. That's basically the upshot of what she is implying here. And she thinks that lesbian lives, lesbian experience, and so on, lesbian existence, let's just say, was the real concrete clue that we could take that this was indeed possible, that in a sense they were doing something that everybody could do, namely sort of discover and come to terms and come to actually live out one's real, sort of genuine individual identity in a way that wouldn't be limited by the unequal, biased, sexist, and heterosexist terms of society such as we know it. For her part, Calhoun says a lot of things that are very similar to Wittig, basically. She's writing a little bit later, and she's addressing Wittig in some ways critically, basically, but and sometimes her message might be a little bit toned down, but in a way also a sharper edge. Her main problem with Wittig, I think, she says, well, Wittig is overly celebrating sort of the freedom that she imagines lesbians enjoy, when in fact, more concretely understood, lesbians suffer actually as much, if not more, oppression than heterosexual women. He basically thinks in a way that's analogous to how, say, white women in a society that is based on anti-black racism can enjoy certain benefits of that, whether they know it or not. Similarly, straight women can enjoy benefits of a system based on a kind of compulsory heterosexuality that can show, when you pay more attention to that, one can realize that, well, two things. One, that yes, lesbian existence is not this wonderful freedom of expression and so on that Wittig was kind of characterizing it as, but rather one that's marked by more intense forms of oppression. And then second, for that very reason, that the interests of lesbians and heterosexual women can actually diverge in a number of ways. Now, in our time, this was still an issue back then, but now it's come so far. The issue of same-sex marriage is, of course, a very big one here. For the longest time, feminists generally had kind of a cool, if not hostile, attitude toward the institution of marriage, seeing that as kind of part of the system of oppression that sort of was keeping women in a subordinate position. Whereas from the perspective of lesbians, but gay men as well, often being excluded from that, not deriving any of the social benefits that come along with that. I mean, of course, well, not everybody's, but a lot of people coming from, expressing support for same-sex marriage, wanting that institution opened up and widened rather than, as many feminists might have preferred, eliminated. So the main upshot, basically, of Calhoun's pieces, then, is just that on many issues, not necessarily all, but on many issues, basically, the interests of lesbians and heterosexual women can and do diverge, and that's just something that needs to be taken into account. I'll just say one last thing. Both make some kind of reference, as I do in the discussion prompt, as well as the assignment question, the last one before the midterm, to a statement by Simone de Beauvoir that one is not born, but rather becomes a woman. Without looking any further at de Beauvoir, you can just think about that statement on its own terms, but I raise it in connection with something that both Wittig and Calhoun say about describing lesbians as not women. And I just want to sort of preempt a possible misunderstanding. There's nothing negative about that. Right? There's no criticism implied. If anything, it's quite the opposite. They see the category of women as being sort of more compromised by sexist oppression than a lot of feminists had otherwise thought. They thought that it might sort of be able to be used in some more emancipatory way, especially Wittig, but Calhoun too, to an extent, are both kind of critical of that view and think that we just need to think in other terms, and that lesbian existence can, to an extent at least, provide some indications of life that would be liberated from the constraints of sex and gender categories that are hierarchical and unequal. So if anything, they mean to say something positive when they characterize lesbians in that way. But this may come up in discussion, or we can be in touch talking about it for the assignment, but I'm going to sign off for now.